so much for joining the Sporting Transition podcast. Really, really grateful to have you on the show today. Appreciate how busy you are and also appreciate the time difference with Canada. So really appreciate your time. Before kicking off, it's a great place to begin would just be to ask you a little bit about yourself, just a tiny bit about your sporting background, what you've been doing, and also what it is you're doing now. And we've spoken previously about how your employer's been great. You've really enjoyed working there. So it's also a great plug for you to say who it is, what they do, and why it's been such a great place to work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for most of my life was a swimmer as my job. I started swimming when I was a kid. I was the kid who preferred being in the water over anywhere else, kind of wanted to be a mermaid when I grew up kind of thing. So parents put me in swimming, and I think they assumed that the second there was early mornings involved, I'd be done. I'm not an early morning person, despite having to wake up early for 20 years of my life to get in the pool, but and kind of progressed through. As a teenager, I was all right. Nothing incredible. I was not one of the sort of crazy superstar young talents. And I had this goal and this dream of going to the Olympics. I always say, I really do have a memory of watching the Sydney Olympics in the year 2000 and seeing the swimming there and thinking that's where I wanted to be and that's what I wanted to do. And then it was by no means a quick journey. It was a lot of ups and downs and a lot of failures in there, but qualified for my first Olympics in 2012 for the London Games, and then a second time 4 years later for Rio 2016, which is where I won a bronze medal in the 200 backstroke. And I didn't feel quite done at that point. I felt like maybe I had a faster time in me or a little bit more in there, and I swam another about 2 years. So I did one more World Championships in 2017, one more Commonwealth Games in 2018, and then called it in summer 2018. And since then, I've sort of been trying to figure out what's next, what the next big thing is. And I sort of dabbled in a few different things before the last couple of years. I've been working in sales, which I think is why we're speaking today. And I started on the sort of tech sales side as an SDR at a company called Tipalti, and was there for a couple of years, and then have recently switched over more on the staffing and recruiting sales. So yeah, finding my footing in sales now is where I would say I'm at.
Interesting. Awesome. So that's a decent intro, lot to tuck into. Just to backpedal a little bit, when did you start believing in swimming that you could win something at the Olympics? You talked about qualifying for London. When you were a kid, when did you really start thinking, okay, I'm pretty good at this and I think I can do it?
I mean, I think it was later than you'd think. And I, like I say, I think I was 9 years old when the Sydney Olympics happened. That's where like the dream was born, but also, like I say, as a teenager, I wasn't that good. I was very much okay. I made some kind of provincial team stuff, which is local representation in Canada, like not our junior national team, nothing like that. And then I finished up high school. So I was 18, 19, moved over and started training with one of our national training centers over here, and was surrounded by people who'd already been to the Olympics. I was training with another Canadian Olympic medalist, and just starting to really see excellence at work every day and what it takes to be world class, and really being surrounded by people who were there and who were doing what I wanted to be doing. And I feel like that was a really solid difference maker, just being in a squad like that. And yeah, my first couple of years there was still sort of rough going. I wasn't making the national team, and everybody else was, and they were going off to Worlds or to Commonwealth Games without me. And yeah, it took a couple of years. So I made my first national team at 21, which I would say for swimming, especially as a woman, is quite late. And it was probably only in the sort of year or two before that I really started to see like, oh, this is something that is possible. And I knew it was in there. And going into that year, that 2012 year, I knew the performance was in there, but I think I surprised some people with qualifying. And it was the following year in 2013 at World Championships that I was on the podium there, and really surprised some people. I think I was a long, slow burn to success.
Yeah. Sure. That's super interesting. I mean, that's incredibly late for a swimmer to really making their name known in the swimming world. Yeah, like you say, most kids will probably go through the junior ranks and into the junior national squads, and earmarked quite early. How did you persevere with going through that phase but not being part of the national squad, for example? So how did you still have the belief when you were 19, 20 that, I didn't make it to the national squad when I was 16 or 17, which most people do? But how did you keep believing that actually I'm going to keep going at this because I believe I can actually compete with those other athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just knew I wanted it more than anyone, and I was willing to work harder than pretty much anyone. And yeah, like I wasn't the person with talent coming out, every hole. Like it was not that. I in some ways that's a really great journey, and I think we see that story a lot, like the crazy talented superstar. And for me, that's incredible to watch, and also not particularly aspirational because there's not really anything you can do to control that. That's a gift. And for me, it was, I did see some other people like me, the people who were, I'm just going to put my head down and do the work, and eventually that's going to start paying off. And we definitely in Canada have had a number of very incredible young superstars, especially on the female swimming side coming up. And I think it's really important for the next generations to see that that's not the only way to come about it. And if you're not on, on the Olympic podium at 16, it doesn't mean that you're never going to be. And I think I had some people around me that really had faith too, some really great coaches, which on the days where you stop believing, it's really nice to have somebody else sort of say, no, you're not crazy. There is something here. And I think it was a little bit me just knowing like that was the goal, and there wasn't really a secondary option. It was Olympics or bust. And yeah, I think that and being surrounded by good people, as much as swimming's an individual sport, it's not like you're in and amongst a team every single day. And it really does take a village to raise any athlete. So I was surrounded by good people and put in a situation where I could do the work, and I had the support, and we got there eventually.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So when you were kind of 18, 19 and you were really grafting away, but you weren't quite on the national squad, did that move your mind to thinking about your sporting transition? And did it make you think a bit more what your life might look like after swimming? Or were you really committed and for you at that point, it still wasn't even consideration? I'm just curious because obviously if you're not quite in the national squad at that age, you're wanting it, you're committed to it, but the hard facts are there, which are you're not on the performance programs or whatever the equivalent is in Canada. So are you thinking a little bit about your career beyond sport, or are you just doubling down because you still feel young enough that you know what, it doesn't matter, you'll catch up in your mid-20s when you get to it?
I'd love to say that I was thinking about it and I had the foresight to start doing that planning. I wasn't at all, really. It's like I was at uni taking steps in terms of education to make sure I was set up for success afterwards, but I was still in and amongst it, and I was making I wasn't so far out of it that it was absolutely irrational and crazy for me to be sort of pushing through. Like I was making our national kind of B squad, so I was third or fourth in the country at that point. By sort of 19 or so, I would say I was about third in the country, maybe in the 200 backstroke. So
Yeah.
it was, the potential was there, and I just needed little incremental kind of wins to get those last little steps by that point. But I think in hindsight, those sorts of thought processes would probably have served me very well. And just, I don't think it's ever too early to start thinking, because with sport, your identity is so wrapped up in that piece of you and who you are as an athlete. It's always important to sort of say, who else am I and what else am I doing? And whether that's, family or future career or other hobbies or other passions or whatever it may be, but having those other things that define you. And I think starting to look big picture and look next steps and look transition is a really good way to keep yourself sort of sane throughout that transition process as you do sort of let go of that one identity and step into the next one. But I was definitely not quite there yet at that phase. I was kind of blinders on, all swimming all the time, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's obviously a wonderful thing to turn around and be able to say, oh yeah, well, in hindsight, I'd obviously be focusing on work experience, studies, etc.
Yeah.
But we know that it doesn't quite work that way. And also, to be the best in your sport, you're obviously going to be pushed probably beyond a reasonable amount to get to the goal you want. So it's reflections, I think, is quite easy. But are you on scholarships, by the way, in Canada? So did you get a scholarship to go to university, or did you have to fund it yourself?
We have a program, we call it carding. It's like our government funded athletes. So, and every sport has slightly different parameters that get you on the list of carded athletes or supported athletes. So it's a monthly salary from the government bursary from the government sort of thing. And if you are, and for swimming, I'm sure it's changed since I've been out of it, but you had to be sort of maybe top 30 in the world or top 50 in the world or something to be eligible for that list. And there was just, a total number per sport of dollar amount that could be allocated. And if you were a sort of tier 1 carded athlete or one of the top, like one of the ones at the top funding level, that created some sort of system. They had something with universities where that paid for your school. So it was the other thing that a lot of Canadians end up doing is going down and swimming in the NCAA system in the States, because there's great scholarship money available to athletes down there. The Canadian university system for sports scholarships, they provide some money. It's never like the sort of concept of like a full ride or a fully funded college experience doesn't exist. But I was fortunately throughout my years of school always on that list of funded athletes, and therefore it was like a program that they had to make sure we were supported going to school, which was great. And so I did have my schooling all funded, which I think in the moment you're like, oh yeah, of course, this is great. And then you come out of school with no debt, and especially in North America, that's something that most people can't say. So that was a really, really great program from our kind of sporting bodies.
Yeah. Okay. And just to backpedal a little bit, you mentioned when we kicked off that you had aspirations to be a mermaid. I was going to ask you if that's for real or not, but actually I interviewed very recently a hurdler and his aspirations was to be a zookeeper. So I'm starting to actually believe these dreams. Were you thinking about being a mermaid, or was there another?
I mean, I think it was just, I loved being in the water. In the first house that I lived in till I was about 6 years old, we did have a pool in the backyard. So like, I remember being a kid and like tying my feet together and pretending to be like Ariel from The Little Mermaid sort of thing. I think somebody sent me, there is like actual mermaids now. I mean, not actual mermaids, but like you can hire them for parties and they have like the proper tails and the whole thing. That wasn't necessarily what I was thinking, but I loved being in the water right from when I was, a baby. So just anything to keep me in the water.
Sure. So your dreams of a mermaid kind of disappear a little bit, and you kind of finish your swimming career as well. That then takes you into this whole new world of work. I think you had some sort of support role in a film, I think, called Nadia Butterfly, and it talks a little bit about the kind of post-Olympic blues as a kind of theme to the movie. Is that a real thing for a lot of athletes? I mean, obviously, you've got those who go to the Olympics, but you've obviously got a lot of athletes who maybe haven't quite made it there, but they're certainly very, very good and at the top of their sport. They just maybe haven't got to the top 3 or the top 2 to go to the Olympics. But is that kind of post-career, post-Olympic blues a real thing? Is it something that you experienced, or based on the film cast, there's obviously other athletes who certainly could relate to the film and kind of participated in it as actors, and the director as well. So just wondered, is it a real thing? And did you feel like you experienced part of it as you're winding up your swimming career?
The film was a funny one. It was not a documentary. It was a fictional kind of arty film, Quoi cinema, so French language. And the sort of the main character's journey through it is she was sort of planning her retirement. But I think post-Olympic letdown is pretty well documented and well kind of acknowledged. It's in that you're, and sort of similar to any high point in life, you're going to get that sort of a little bit of a sort of flattening after, in that, you're at the peak, the epitome, the thing you've been working your whole life for. And regardless of outcome, regardless of performance, if you do well, incredible. If you don't do well, it is what it is. But no matter what, once that's done, you're sort of like, oh, like, now what? And even if it's not the end of your career in sport, and even if you're going another cycle and go 4 more years and you might go back, but I think it's just something in the, the dopamine rush, the serotonin rush of performing on the highest athletic stage and being at this peak of emotion and everything, that no matter what, you're just going to get that little bit of a flattening after. And so, with the highs come the lows, and with the ups come the downs. And that's the nature of sport and life, but sport, I think, just exacerbates it. So, and not everybody experiences it in a full-on depression sort of way. Many do. And I think there's a lot more visibility on athletes speaking about mental health struggles now. Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, all these people who have, the top performers in their sport and are still going through that. So it doesn't really have anything to do with performance, but yeah, you definitely just feel like, oh, like it's all over, and it's gone in such a flash, and it's this incredible 2 weeks, but it goes so quick, and you do always kind of feel like a slump after, I would call it. And I think it's even more exacerbated if you're leaving sport entirely right from there. I kind of kept going, so it's easy to just kind of get back into the routine of training after the Olympics and let that sort of carry you through those. But it is definitely a pretty well documented phenomenon. I think for most athletes, where you're just, you're leaving the real high of something, and you're going to feel a little bit of a slump after.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And when you finish your career, did you also feel like a real sense of excitement as to what might be next? Because all of a sudden you'll be kind of liberated in some ways of the shackles that bound you to the swimming pool at 5 a.m. every day in the evening, and all the recovery sessions. So in a way, were you actually quite excited by what will be coming next, which is all this talent, all this grit, all this determination you can now unleash into something else? You might not know what it is, but you know that you've got something special in terms of attributes that you can bring into something else. But were you feeling excited by that, or did it not quite hit you? But as an athlete, actually, you will be able to do a hell of a lot, whether it's in the charity world, whether it's in the corporate world, or whatever it is you decide to do afterwards.
Yeah, I think I was one of the lucky ones in that I very much chose my exit strategy. It was not, I was planning to go to a meet and I didn't get to qualify. So I kind of decided, okay, maybe that's it, or injury or something. Like I qualified for our team for the Commonwealth Games in 2018. I decided I was going to do that, and that was going to be the end. And it sort of, I was ready to be done. I was done. Mentally, I was done. I knew it was time to go. And then it was sort of more emotional than I thought it would be. I swam my last race, and one of the younger Australian girls who has since won about 5 Olympic gold medals, she's incredible, Kaylee McEwen, and she came up to me and she's like, "Oh my God, was that your last race?" And like gave me a hug, and I just started crying. So yeah, there was more emotion to it than I maybe thought there was going to be. But yeah, I was excited to get on with the next bit. You can stay in that sporting bubble for as long as you do, but eventually you do have to sort of see what else is out there in the whole big wide world. And I was excited to see what else I was besides a swimmer, and see what else was in there. And also, like you say, not being shackled to the pool at all times, and being an athlete, it's a great, very exciting, very cool life in some ways. And in some ways, you have to say no to a lot of stuff, because everything you do, every decision you make is catered to performance and getting a good night's sleep and being away for 4, 5, 6 months of the year. And so you miss a lot. And so I was excited to also just have a bit of freedom and a bit of, let's just say yes to everything. Anything somebody comes at me with, let's do it. Let's have fun with being a little bit more free. So I was excited for a few different facets of being retired, or retired from sport anyway.
Yeah. And what was it at the leading up to the Commonwealths that made you decide, okay, this is going to be the last one? What were the sort of triggers around that time? Because I can't remember exactly, but it looked like you finished 5th, 6th, or 7th at the Commonwealth, so you're still delivering good results, and it seemed like you could still be competitive, and it didn't seem like you were injured. So what were the triggers at that point in your life to make you think, okay, now's probably the right time to think about stepping away, and in fact, yes, this will be my final year?
Yeah, I think I was ready to be done the summer before. So 2017 World Championships, I think it came maybe 4th or 5th there. Like you say, it wasn't a bad swim. The time was all right. I'd had the best year of training in my life leading into that 2017 Worlds. Like training, every in-season competition was, I think, the best I'd ever swam in season, best I'd swam at our kind of World Championship trials meet in Canada to qualify for the team. And then I got to Worlds there and I didn't go best time. And I was like, if I, after all that incredible year, if I'm still going kind of right on the same time, maybe that's what I've got in me. And maybe on a perfect day with perfect circumstances in the perfect environment, I had a little more in me, but it was also just like, maybe that's it. Maybe I've done what I can do. And I think there was also like you're sitting in we have like a sort of what they call the ready room where you're sitting before they walk you out behind the blocks for your race at any of these sort of big international meets. There's always the, the nervous butterflies and there's going to be nerves because you're about to go race and you've trained hard and you've worked hard for it. But I was feeling those last few meets, the nerves were skewing dread more than excitement, where I just sort of, I don't know, something changed. I wasn't in it enough anymore, I think, to get excited for racing fast. It was more fear of not racing as fast as I wanted to or something. There was just sort of something a little bit different. I wasn't as excited about it anymore. And so I'd had that swim at Worlds and I was like, that might be it. But based on that performance, it qualified me for our Canadian team for the Commonwealth Games. And they were in Australia. I'd lived in Australia before and trained down there a bit. So I felt like fun way to go out. Let's go live the last sort of 6-8 months in Australia, spend one more winter outside of winter and go down and be in the summer all winter and go out on a fun meet down in Australia, which was it was right where I was training on the Gold Coast. It was kind of like, it had been my home earlier in 2017 as well. So I went down there and I lived there from like November till Commonwealth Games in May and just had fun with it, which I think was a really nice way to go out. And I still, I swam all right at the Commonwealth Games. I had fun training with a new squad in Australia and living with one of the girls there. And it's, I think the triggers were that sort of that lack of excitement. And I think just being like, I think I've done what I can do. And I can keep pushing to see if there's a little bit more. And maybe there is, but maybe I've done what I can do. And I think that's okay. And I can look back on a career with a lot of pride. So that can be it. And I can be sad. I think like you can leave satisfied. Count yourself lucky, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly from speaking to the athletes I'm speaking to, I think that's probably the exit that they want to experience from their sport. And definitely those who do it through injury or whatever else, it just does become a bit harder. So that makes a lot of sense. So as you go through this process, you're starting to kind of now realize that there is something beyond sport that you need to start thinking about. How do you detach yourself from your identity as a swimmer? Or don't you? So you kind of package your past as a swimmer, you embrace it for absolutely everything that it has been for you. But how do you move on now in kind of creating this new identity for yourself? Do you feel like you had a clear identity even whilst you're swimming? I know some people who had that for them swimming or whatever their sport was part of their identity, but not necessarily integral or a big part to it. It was just an important part. From your perspective, how did it feel when you retired? Were you kind of having to kind of figure yourself out again in some ways?
I think of it kind of happening in stages where the first sort of 6-8 months, I didn't dive into any specific work. Like you mentioned, I did this movie that kind of came to me and they asked me to do it. And I was like, that sounds fun. That's something I've never tried. Sure, let's do that. So I went and did that. And I ran a series of swim like clinics and camps, like going into swim clubs and doing some just like little sessions with different clubs kind of all across Canada and making, capitalize while I'm still relevant, while people still know who I am, do a bit of that. And so I did some of that sort of thing, traveled a little bit, all the things that, I wouldn't have been able to do when I was full-time swimming. But that was still very much, the swimming identity was still very much in play there. And then once that sort of finished and I started working, and my first job, I started working at Lululemon, which is based in Vancouver, so where I live. So a very Vancouver company to start working for, and a company that does athlete partnerships. And I'd done some things, sort of ambassadors type stuff on the other side when I was an athlete. So was just sort of like, we'll do this for a little bit and figure myself out and ease myself into, okay, what's next? And then the pandemic hit. So then it was like, okay, well, we'll keep doing this for now because it's not the time to necessarily start something new. And I'm not somebody who would want to work from home fully remote all the time and not ever engage with people. So I was working in the store. That was great. But I was still sort of leading up to the pandemic before it actually hit. And I was doing a little bit of stuff with our Canadian sports media, commentating things. And I think it was in the back of my mind, I was sort of aware if I do a lot of this, maybe they'll bring me to Tokyo. Maybe I'll sort of be part of the sort of entourage of media something in Tokyo, helping out, doing whatever. I don't care. I just want to be there. I think I wasn't quite ready to not be at the Olympics. Again, still holding on to that identity. And then the pandemic hit and Tokyo didn't happen as planned and it got pushed a year. And then when it happened, it was sort of a weird games and not a games that I was sad to miss, if I'm honest. I don't think if of all the Olympics to go to, like that was not the one. It was funny, the drastic shift I felt after that one Olympics since competing happened, where I think leading up to it, you're like, okay, I'm still like, I could be there. I could have pushed my career longer. Like I could have gone. And then that one happened and it was like, no matter what, I wasn't going past this. And kind of most of my people are done. And it took that sort of one Olympics to happen and not being there to sort of be like, oh, okay, that's kind of a past life now. That's sort of no longer at the forefront of who I am. And I very happily watched Paris this past summer and, you know, a bit of nostalgia and a little bit of bittersweet at times being like, oh my God, remember when that was me? But no FOMO, no need to be there, no like hanging on tightly to that sort of version of myself. It feels like a whole other life now. So I sort of pinpoint most of that sort of lightning and passing along to that one Olympics happening and sort of letting me let go of that phase. And I mean, it's not that it's not always going to be part of my identity and it's not something that I'm always proud of. And my friends love to bring it up. If I meet somebody like, oh, she has an Olympic medal. And you're like, yep, that's hello. Me.
Yeah, man. You must get so many invites to parties and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or, you know, people saying, oh, can you bring your medal? I want to see it. And you're like, sure. But yeah, I think it's, we all contain all sorts of versions of ourselves. And that was sort of the predominant version of myself for so many years. And that, yeah, once it sort of starts to recede, now you're like, oh my God, when I used to do that and train twice a day and this, that, the other, it does feel almost like a separate life.
And then what's the new you that you're seeing now that you've left swimming? Because I imagine when you're swimming, I'm sure there's loads of stuff that goes on, loads of socials, I'm sure there's some parties you go to, but on the whole, there's probably a lot of constraints, a lot of no's, a lot of focus on what you need to do to perform. So that probably kind of constrains who you are in some ways into the kind of swimmer bucket. So since you've left swimming, what have you seen in yourself that's making you feel like, wow, this is really cool. I didn't even know this was me, but you're kind of learning it as you go on.
Yeah, I think there was, like you say, there, like, it's not that it's a whole new version, but it's more like I can lean into other things now. And definitely that sort of like weekends away, popping away on vacation. Honestly, my sort of fun money budget and everything, like I'm a big concert person, festivals, all that kind of thing, anything live music and that sort of thing. Like, and not that I never could go to a concert, but it was pretty rare that worked for a schedule and things like that. So I feel like that I've leaned in a big way into. And I mean, I think the other thing that's been really fun is figuring out other ways I like to move. Like I still have the sort of athlete guilt of taking a day off working out. Like I still sort of feel the need to, and I find my well-being suffers if I don't continue a sort of pretty good workout regimen. And it was being very fit and active has been part of my identity my whole life. And it's just looks different now. And that's been another kind of fun thing to see what else I can lean into. And now I don't really swim ever. I run, I box. I love like a sort of studio class, like a spin class or a Barry's boot camp or like these sorts of things. And the sort of social that goes along with that. Because I think sport for me has always been such a social thing. And you're swimming on a team and you're surrounded by a group of people. So making that the case still and having it still be a social thing and going and being in a class and meeting other people and doing it all together. I think that'll always sort of be part of who I am. Just it looks different now. So yeah.
No, that's really cool. And I guess, I'm conscious of time because you need to jump off in a few minutes. Can you just kind of talk us through a little bit your decision? You talked earlier about running coaching clinics and camps across Canada. So already you were starting to reinvent yourself in some ways. You decided you don't want to do that anymore. You obviously then had the experience at Lululemon as well, which kind of exposed you to something else. But over the last couple of years, you've settled it more into sales, so sales development, now account management. Just talk us a little bit through that transition from trying something initially after swimming, deciding that actually this isn't for me and into the long term, and then moving into sales, and how you feel about sales now, whether you feel sales is definitely the right place for you, the right home you can see yourself flourish. And then I've got another question for you after that, but that'll be
it. I think the initial transition and working at Lululemon was a bit more of a sort of, in my mind, always a bit of a stopgap, just sort of, I didn't quite know what I wanted. And so it was sort of like, all right, let's go work retail. Let's chat. Let's get in with, and in my mind, maybe it was getting in with a company where I knew the head office was based in Vancouver. I was interested in maybe looking at a corporate job, transitioning over there. And then I worked there for a couple of years and I wasn't necessarily seeing the opportunities I wanted to in terms of transitioning over to that head office. And I think I had a few friends already working at this company, Topalti, that I ended up going into, which is a fintech company. We were selling kind of fintech software, but that sort of athlete to sales pipeline, there is definitely a fair few of us that end up in sales in whatever permutation, whether it's, on the software sales side, whether it's real estate, whether it's, it just does seem like there's a lot of parallels, I guess. And it's a very measurable thing, like we are used to. You're looking for metrics, you're looking for numbers, and hopefully you're in an environment where the harder you hustle and the harder you're willing to grind it out, the more success you'll see. And I think athletes are drawn to that, where we tend to be competitive, we tend to be ambitious, we tend to want to hit our growth kind of benchmarks and our goals and move on up. And I think that's what sort of drew me to sales, and where I was seeing like, okay, well, I want to make sure I'm in an environment where if I want to work harder, I'm going to see success from it. Like, I don't want it to be futile and just putting my head down and working and not seeing promotion or growth or more money or whatever that success may look like. So that was sort of what brought me there, and a few people sort of referring me into the company. Because I think the other thing, and I'm sure for any athletes who end up listening to this, there's a pretty common lack of confidence in transitioning out of sport and having this sort of typically quite unconventional resume without necessarily not all of the job experience from like your late teens, early 20s, starting in the job market, doing your sort of entry-level jobs, maybe moving up. And for me, I was leaving sport at 27 with a ton of great experience, and also translating that and communicating that to hiring managers and saying, no, I don't have 5 years industry experience, or I don't have whatever the job description's asking for. I don't have that, but here's how what I've done is going to make sense anyway. And we don't always have the most confidence in people trusting our abilities and people trusting that we're going to be good at it. We just don't have maybe some of the hard skills yet. That's what we're going to have to learn. So I think for me, the nice thing was for that first sales job, I had somebody working at the company who vouched for me and got me in. And that gave me the confidence, I think, too, I was almost so scared to apply to jobs, just being like, well, they're all going to say no. Like, I don't have the experience they need. And I was getting a little bit sort of panicky and spirally about it. And so having that sort of and that referral helped me to say, okay, now I'm starting to have some stuff on my resume that I can speak to and be confident in now. And honestly, I've had myself debunked most of the time, in that everybody who you talk to in interview processes, or that I have talked to, does see the value in sport and does see those transitional skills and what being an elite athlete means in terms of how good of an employee you will be. But it was on me just not necessarily trusting that. So I think there's something to be said for having faith. And if it's somebody who doesn't, and if it's somebody you're interviewing with who just does not see that value, that's maybe not somewhere you want to work anyway. Because if they're not seeing your value and what you're going to bring to the table as somebody who's made it to a high level in sport, but maybe culture-wise, it's not going to be a fit anyway.
Yeah. And I guess the only thing I'd add there is probably just putting the onus on the athlete to understand how to communicate them. So yeah, get it. You've been in the pool for 10 years. You've done stuff that nobody else will be able to do really, other than a handful of people in the world. But let me articulate to you why that's valuable.
Yeah.
And then just really being able to create a brand or a resume that kind of says, give me a chance because you won't regret it. I don't have those 5 years that somebody else has, but I've got something that's actually far better. I think so. Certainly, in my experience, just even seeing somebody being able to articulate that is actually a really great thing. I guess just in the last few minutes, talk us a little bit through the TUC program that you did at the School of Business at Dartmouth. Obviously, it's there to help transitioning athletes as well as military personnel. So I'd just love to know what your experience of it and if you felt it kind of helped you either practically or just from a confidence perspective that you felt like, okay, this actually gave me the confidence to go into the market.
Yeah, it was a really, really incredible program. It's about 10 or 12 days. You're on site at Dartmouth College in the States, which is one of their Ivy League schools, like a really, really prestigious school, and out of their TUC School of Business, where their MBA program is out of. And I had a close friend of mine who she swam for New Zealand, but she'd gone to university at Cal Berkeley in the States, so another very prestigious school in the States. And she, through friends there, had heard about this program. And when she went to the second cohort of it, and I went the following year to the third. She told me about it, and it was about 75 of us. I would say about 60% were US military and successful military personnel. Your Marines, your Green Berets, like all the sort of the top Army leaders and Navy leaders and Air Force leaders. And on the athlete side, it would maybe about 40% athletes, and that was international. So there were some American athletes, but also on the athlete side, they opened it up more globally. So I think the main takeaway, it was the most incredible group of people. And I sort of went into it not being American and being aware that maybe I don't know how to put this, being surrounded by their military. I'm like, I don't know if we'll have the same views. I'm not somebody who thinks, a huge military budget and always being in conflict is a good idea. So is there going to be a little bit of, oh, this is sort of an uncomfortable conversation or any of that? And while I'm sure kind of political views wise, there was quite a spectrum there, and I wouldn't always agree with all of it, but the sort of mutual sort of fandom that we were like, oh my God, you guys are so incredible. You're risking your life. You're doing all these things. And they're like, you guys are so incredible. You're doing this. And it was just this very, very, very cool group of people where you were just sort of the stories that started coming out as you're getting to know them. And you're like, oh my God, like the stuff you went through, the things you put your body through, getting blown up, getting like thrown out of planes, like all these crazy, crazy stories. And so that was like, I think the group of people was very inspiring, and the network that it creates is very cool. The support that the TUC School of Business gives to that program, like they treat you like you're an alumni of their MBA program, basically. Like they really welcome you in, and it is something, if anybody out there is given the chance to do this program, it's called the Transition to Business, and it's for the military and the athletes. But you get access to a lot of their MBA professors and a lot of work on sort of tailoring your resume and all these sorts of things. Like you say, that communication piece of articulating how your experience and for both athletes and for the military personnel, it was, your whole life was this one thing, and now you're trying to apply it to a whole new world. So a lot of useful things that way, and just in terms of presenting yourself. And also access to a bunch of other kind of TUC School of Business alumni and their journeys and what career paths they've had, and sort of seeing these people become very successful and running businesses, and sort of starting to see, okay, well, what avenues maybe make sense for me. And it was quite recent out of swimming when I did it, where maybe even another year to figure a bit more out would have been good in terms of practically applying it to like what job I'm going to do. But oh my God, I can't speak highly enough of it. It was really, really incredible. And definitely on that transition piece, just speaking to your success in sport and pivoting that to sort of the corporate world, I think was super valuable.
Super. Awesome. Well, I'm conscious you need to drop off onto an internal call. So, Hilary, super grateful for freeing up some time today to talk us through everything you have. Super well articulated. I'm sure people listening will find huge amounts of value in your experiences. So, really grateful for that. And best of luck in your next endeavors. I know you're still working out what your journey is, but it sounds like you're doing all the right things to find the right career path for you. So, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it as well, Mark. Thanks so much.